Harry Lorayne, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure, sir.
For people who know you from your work in memory and teaching your memory systems all over the world, they might not know about your start in magic. I've got your wonderful book that Mel Brooks called a re-memoir, Before I Forget. And you tell a lot of stories about your childhood. Do you remember getting bit by the magic bug? Did you watch someone and you said, man, I would love to be able to do that?
I wrote about that in the book you just mentioned, so it may sound a bit repetitive or redundant, but do you want me to tell that story?
Yeah, just how it began.
Yeah, well, you know what happened? Let me preface it by saying this was very important in my life. I was a very shy kid, Patrick. Well, I mean shy to the point of sickness. I never made eye contact. I never spoke to anybody unless they spoke to me first, etc. And then one day I was at a park near where I lived on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, a ghetto. We didn't know that word at that time, but that's what it was. It was a terrible area. I'm one of the original dead-end kids, you know.
Yeah,
anyway, I was about 11 years old, and I went to this park, and there was a counselor there, a guy who used to take care of the kids playing shuffleboard, all outdoor stuff. But one day, this was kind of the pivot point in my life. One day it was raining, and he took us all indoors. And I guess he didn't know how to handle us indoors. He was used to teaching us, you know, paddle tennis and shuffleboard and things like that. Anyway, he did a card trick, and that changed my life, Patrick, because I know I remember saying to myself, oh, God, if only I could do that. And, of course, I was too shy to go to this man and ask him how he did it, nor did I realize that you didn't ask a magician how he did a trick. He wasn't going to tell you anyway.
Yeah.
So anyway, that changed my life. I ran home, and I told this story in Before I Forget. I'm not too proud of it, but I went home. I lived in a tenement building on the 5th story, no elevators. We had to walk up and down 5 floors, which I guess was good exercise, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, I walked up and down the stories of that building, and I stole milk bottles. In those days, you got to remember, I'm going back like 80 years, Patrick. In those days, we were just getting into the glass bottles of milk with cream on top. A lot of the kids used to drink the cream off the top before the parents shook the bottle, you know, to integrate the cream. Anyway, what they used to do, at least in that building that I'm talking about, is they would put the empty bottles outside the door. The milkman would come, take let's say 3 empty bottles and put down 3 full bottles. That's the way it was done. So what I did is I stole these milk bottles and ran to a local grocery store where I got a penny or 2 pennies per bottle as a deposit. I needed about 18 cents. I think it cost me 18 cents to buy the cheapest deck of cards I could in those days in order to see if I could work out that trick that I saw this man do. And I did. I worked out about 4 or 5 different ways of doing it. And again, as I say, that changed my life because, you know, it's almost like if a tree falls in the forest and nobody is there, does it make a sound? I knew this trick now that I had worked out, but if I didn't show it to anybody, well, why is it a trick? You know, it's not a trick until you fool somebody with it. So I had to now do what I found very difficult to do in my early life, and that is say at least 3 words to somebody. That is, pick a card if I wanted to show them the trick. So like I say, Patrick, that changed my life. That started my interest in magic, because what started to happen is my friends to whom I had shown this trick started to say, hey, Harry, can you do another trick for us? Well, I didn't know another trick. So I ran to the library near my house. We called it the Pitt Street Library. It was actually the Hamilton Fish Library, but it was on a street named Pitt Street. And I looked for magic books. In those days, the kind of the magic books were all had to do with magnets and springs and things that I wasn't really interested in.
Right.
But every once in a while, I saw a card trick. That was my interest. And boy, I smelled those pages. They smelled great. And I hugged the book to my chest and ran home with it just so I could learn another trick. So I think I told you more than you wanted to know, Patrick, but that's how the magic bug started.
No, that's a great starting point, because nowadays kids they're obsessed with video games and everything's computerized. But back then you had, a park, a table, a book. Do you remember trying these tricks out on your friends and going click? Maybe this is going to be the end of your shyness problem?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it was the end of it, but it started to become the end of it because, like I say, I had to make eye contact. I couldn't look at a person's chest while I talked to them, which is what I used to do.
Yeah.
I never made eye contact when I was a little boy. And like I say, I had to say those 3 words. I had to talk about the trick if I wanted to do or perform the darn thing.
Yeah.
So that started really to change my life. And when I say to people how shy I was, they don't believe me because they know me from the latter part of my life. But Patrick, I overcompensated. I really was I was shy to the point of sickness. Really.
It is hard to believe. I guess you just came back against so many things in your childhood, Harry. I was not aware of your upbringing and the things you had to kind of push through. And you mentioned something I found very interesting in your book, and that is the word ambition. Your parents never would have used that word, huh? The idea that you can actually bootstrap something and go wherever you want to go.
No, that was not something my parents knew about. I look back at my childhood and I try not to think about it. I've made it my business to forget most of it. It was a terrible childhood. My parents were professional poor people, as I've written. We lived in an area where everybody was poor, but my parents were better at it than anyone else. I mean, they really were professional poor people. But you know what it is, Patrick? For younger people now, they're not going to understand this. You have to realize that when I was a kid, there was no television. I thought that the whole world was this way, the way I was living. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't anything I ever thought of doing about it. I figured this is it. This is life.
Yeah.
Nowadays you look at television, you see the way other people live. I didn't have that when I was a child. There was no television.
That's right. And you were raised in that beautiful radio generation, right? Fibber McGee.
It was radio, but the radio didn't tell us much about the rest of the world. I listened to programs, Renfrew of the Mounties, Fibber McGee and Molly. Some of the old radio shows are coming back to mind. They were good shows. They were wonderful. I enjoyed them. Inner Sanctum was a scary show. I remember all those things, but they didn't tell me how the rest of the world lived.
What about things that got you into the Ripley's Believe It or Not? I can still see a picture. I think it's in here it is in Before I Forget. Harry Lorayne from Brooklyn, New York can string 9 pieces of thread through the head of a needle behind his back. How did it even occur to you to do that with one thread?
Well, because it was something, for some reason, I learned it. And, I'll tell you honestly, I forget where the heck I learned it. Again, we're going back a few decades, Patrick. I did that when I learned it when I was doing close-up table magic at Billy Reed's Little Club. I was about 19 years old. And I had just learned that, and I liked it. And I figured, gee, it gets me a little away from card tricks because that's what I was doing mostly was card stuff. So I did it at the Little Club, and somebody who I guess had to do with the newspaper business or something saw me do it, and he's the one that asked me about it, and he asked me to do it again and again, and I did, and he's the one that contributed it to Believe It or Not.
What was it like meeting actor Victor Jory? Because he was the magician. People don't know him today, but he was the magician detective character, right? What happened?
Exactly. He said, when we met, he got a little friendly. He told me, everybody thought that Orson Welles started that concept of the major figure in a play or a story being a magician and a detective. But Victor Jory said, no, he started it. As a matter of fact, when I met him, that's why he was in New York. And I met him at Billy Reed's Little Club that I had just mentioned. He was pretty important in those days, at least a well-known name. He played Helen Keller's, the blind woman.
Yeah.
He played Helen Keller's father in the movie in which my dear friend Anne Bancroft played Helen Keller's teacher.
Yep.
Her name was Annie Sullivan, played by, like I say, Annie Bancroft, for which she won the Academy Award, incidentally, in 1962. So you see how far back we're going there. It was a movie called The Miracle Worker, and it was a very good movie, and Victor Jory was, as I say, played Helen Keller's father. He was a pretty well-known name. So when you say how, I talk about pivot points. He was a big pivot point because it was because of him that my mind flipped to the other side. I have two areas that I love. The first one was card magic. That changed my life, as I just told you. The second thing was memory. I was very interested in that. That's another long story. I thought I had a terrible memory, which I do. I have a terrible natural memory. I'm dyslexic, Patrick. That was a word I didn't know when I was a kid. I don't even know if the teachers knew it. They just stamped me moron. You get the name, you play the game. I thought I was just stupid. I found out, well, I may be, but I found out that I also was dyslexic. And that's another story, Patrick. Forgive me for going off on tangents, but when I mentioned dyslexia, it sounds like I'm being so terribly sad about it. No, dyslexia helped me. It made me a much better teacher because, I've been told that I'm one of the best expository writers, one of the best writers teaching alive today. And you know why? It's because I teach as if everybody is like me, no ambiguities, as if everybody is dyslexic. It made me a much better teacher. So I'm not really complaining about it. It's a pain in the neck. I have no sense of direction because of that. I get lost in my own house, Patrick. And computers, I'm a terrible computer person again, because of the dyslexia. But other than that, it's not a problem. Anyway, I was interested in the two areas, card magic and memory. I think I learned it originally. I started to be interested in it from Greater Magic, that magic book.
Yeah, Hilliard, right? John Hilliard.
Exactly. Northern Hilliard. That's so long ago. And anyway, it started me here. So my interest in memory was with cards. In other words, any memory demonstration or stunt I did was memory with cards. And what happened, Victor Jory came in. He was interested in magic. He came in with a friend. A few days later, he came in with another friend and asked me to do what I had done the week before for this friend. And that, to make a long story short, he came in for a month or more every few days with a different friend. And what I was interested in those days, you got to remember I was very young, but I wanted to do he always asked me to do my set routine that I did at every table, which I did, but I always wanted to do at least one trick that Victor Jory hadn't seen yet because I wanted to impress him, Well, I did that, but what happened, my knowledge at that time, again, remember I was like 19 years old, my knowledge was finite. I could do a certain number of card tricks, and that was it. Now you put a deck of cards in my hand, I can go on forever because I make it up as I go along. I can do that with all the knowledge over 70 years. So, but at that time I couldn't do that, obviously. So what happened is I ran out of stuff, out of card sleight of hand that I could do for him. So the last time or one time he came in, I had no choice. I said, well, I got one thing left to show her. That was a memory thing I was doing with cards. In my mind, that was like scraping the bottom of the barrel. I didn't think it was very good or very impressive. And that's what I did for him. And like I say, that was a pivot point. That changed my life, because after I did this memory stunt, which I'm told now, afterwards, is one heck of a strong thing to do with a shuffle deck of cards, he got up and he started to applaud, and he said in a loud voice that everybody there could hear him. He said, "Harry, the sleight of hand you've done these 20 times I've seen you was terrific, you're great, etc. But what you just did," and he started to rave about the memory. That changed my life. The light bulb went off. I said, wait a minute. I didn't know that it could be that important.
Yeah.
So as I say, that changed my life.
Well, there's no sleight of hand. You're doing something live with no smoke, no mirrors that seems absolutely impossible. Because most people, you tell them one card, they forget it 5 seconds later. Here you are cranking through 52 with perfect accuracy.
Yeah, that stunt that I did then, haven't done it in years because I don't think I have to impress people that much anymore, what I had him do, he shuffled the deck. I said, call him off to me fairly rapidly, which he did. And then first he shuffled him, then he called off with the 52 cards. Then I said, give me any number from 1 to 52. And he'd say 17, and I'd say it's the Jack of Hearts. And I said, count to the 17th card, take a look, but don't upset the sequence of the cards, which he did. I did that 2 or 3 times, give me any number. Number 33 is the 4 of spades, so on. Then I said, name a card. And he'd say the 8 of clubs. I say, that's the 12th card. And he checked it, and it was. And I did that 2 or 3 times. And the end of the piece was, I said, Victor, do you play poker? He said, yeah. I said, what is the best poker hand? And he said a royal flush, which I always went to the royal flush. If somebody said the aces, I would say that's very good, but a royal flush is better. Yeah. And I would say, what's your favorite suit? Clubs, hearts, spades, or diamonds? And Jory said spades. And I said, I'm making up the numbers, obviously. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, take a look at the 5th, 12th, 18th, 30th, and 42nd cards, which he did, and they were the royal flush and spades. That's what I used to do. It was very strong, I realized. After his attitude, after his reaction.
There's funny how people endow the royal flush in spades. There's like an extra magical sexiness to it, even though in poker, it's, it doesn't really mean...
I always, I'm doing a book now, which is going to be Jaw Droppers 2, I think, and there's so much with royal flushes. That's one of my things. I love 4 of a kind effects and royal flush effects, and I usually, if I'm going to do a royal flush effect for laymen, I use the spades. For some reason, you're right, that's more impressive.
You mentioned earlier the dyslexia, and your ability, or I guess your decision over and over again to use that as a stepping stone rather than a stumbling block. And one of the tricks you used, if I can put it that way, is that you would diffuse the insult. Like a teacher or a student would say, you're a dummy. You'd say, yeah, and you'd agree with them and kind of exaggerate it. And that sort of burst the bubble.
Well, you know what? I used to do that because, again, it's a different area of my young life. I was brought up with bullies. People talk about bullying now among young people, and I'm very aware of that. I went through it. First of all, I was my nickname when I was a kid was Pee-wee. I was a very short kid, I was 4'6", and I finally shot up to 5'6", so I was short guy, and because of that, I guess that was part of the bullying. But I started to understand with a certain kind of bullying, like when in school, if I did something stupid or if I couldn't answer a question, and a bully would say to me, boy, you're pretty stupid, Harry, I would agree with him. Yes. Mm-hmm. I was very smart that way because that stopped the bullying. I'd say, you're right, I can't believe I was that stupid. That's it. That ended it. Yeah. And I've written about that. I've tried to teach it to some kids. I know I taught it to my own son when he was a little boy. I explained to him, if you ever bullied it, just agree with these idiots. That ends it. Yeah.
Yeah, you take away their tool.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm bringing this up again because I'm really amazed at your ability to get mathematical concepts across in a way where here I can summarize it this way. I believe there are 3 kinds of people in the world: those who are good at math and those who aren't. So I'm terrible at it, but I learned so much from your math stuff. I'm trying to think of the original book back in the, what's the name of that book that you wrote?
Well, there was Miracle Math.
Miracle Math, that's right.
Miracle Math, yeah.
How did you get into this math, the clarity?
I don't know. I don't know. I guess again that maybe my dyslexia helped, because again, when I was in school, we were taught, for example, visualize an addition problem. Three numbers, 3 under 3 under 3, etc. Yeah. We were taught to start your adding at the right of the problem and carry whatever you have to. I found that very difficult, so I started to do it from the left, which is one of the things I taught in Miracle Math, and that ended up much better. I don't know. I can't give you an answer there. Nobody ever taught me this kind of stuff. I think the main answer is that I tried to make things easier for myself. Mm-hmm. That's what it boiled down to, I mean, just the other day, somebody was talking to me. They said, he said, I got to add 19 to a number for something he was doing. I got to keep adding 19. And boy, to add 19 to some numbers, you try to add 19 to 86. What a pain in the neck. Mm-hmm. I said, not for me. For God's sakes, you want to add 19 to 86. Take off 20. That's easy. That's 66. Then add 1. That's 67. There's your answer.
Yeah.
So don't ask me why. When he asked me that's what I said right away. That's the way my mind works with numbers.
And you mentioned, let me fast forward to the Tonight Show and your long friendship with Johnny Carson. He kind of made it, he got it out publicly by asking you a question he knew the answer to. Well, how many degrees do you have, Harry? And you said...
did I write that? Yeah, I guess I did write that before I forget. Yeah, at one show, he said to me, Harry, how many degrees do you have? So I started to laugh. Mm-hmm. And I said, Johnny, I have 1 year of high school. And we went into a commercial, talked about other things. Now, I think I also mentioned in before I forget, I mentioned that after I said that on the Tonight Show, about 10 or 2 weeks later, 10 days or 2 weeks later, Freddie DeCordova called me. He was a friend also. He was the producer of the Tonight Show. Mm-hmm. He called me. He said, "Oh, gee, Harry, we got a lot of mail, like 8,000 pieces of mail, all negative about you." I said, "Oh my God, what did I do?" Mm-hmm. He said, "Well, they all are saying about the same thing. They said when you said that you only have 1 year of high school," which is the way I answered Johnny when he said, "How many degrees do you have?" I said, "Johnny, got 1 year of high school." "Okay, wrong. You can't do that." He said, and I said, "Why?" I didn't understand it, but live and learn. He said, because all these pieces of mail we got, they all said, we have enough trouble keeping our kids in school as it is. We don't need to see an obviously successful person. He has to be successful if he's on the Tonight Show. Yeah. So it's not good to see an obviously successful person say that he only has 1 year of high school. Right. That's wrong. And as I said, live and learn. I learned. I'm not going to lie when somebody asks me now, Patrick, let's be honest. When I talk, I'm a New York kid. Mm-hmm. I'm an original D's, Dems, and Those kid. When I talk, you know that I'm not a PhD, okay? So when somebody says to me, what's the limit of your what education do you have? I'm not going to lie. I say the truth. I have 1 year of high school, but if I had it to do over again, I would certainly get my diploma. That's okay if I say it that way.
That's right. Otherwise, some people are going to interpret it as you're a walking ad for leaving high school early.
Exactly. That was what all those pieces, 8,000 pieces of mail said that Freddie DeCordova told me about. Yeah. Listen, Patrick, you live and learn. I learned another thing on the Johnny Carson show when they asked me, Johnny once said to me, and I think I wrote this before I forget also, he said, Harry, how does somebody like you with your background become the world's foremost memory training specialist? And I said, stomach cramps. Well, at that point, he got a little white under his makeup, He thought I went nuts, And we went into a commercial, and I said, no, Johnny, it's a cliffhanger. I'll explain it. And that is the truth. That's what started me being interested in memory in the first place. The idea that I was able to apply that to cards. I had an ego that I didn't know I had when I was a kid. So these things were important to me to get noticed, right. I guess. In any case, what happened is when I was a kid, I was getting stomach cramps every morning. That's why I said stomach cramps. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a way of life until I started to realize as time went by that there was a Mrs. Goldfisher. I'll never forget her when I was a kid. I remember again, I was about 11 years old, something like that. She used to give us a test every day, 10 questions on a yellow rectangular pieces of paper, and I can still visualize it. Mm-hmm. And she'd ask 10 questions, things that she had talked about in the classroom or things we had read that she told us to read.
Right.
And then she would grade the papers of everybody. And the most important thing, again, a pivot point that changed my life, is that we had to take it home for at least one parent to sign. And my father, who died when I was 12, so you can see how far back I'm going, he was the signee. And when I was bringing home bad grades, I was getting on these tests, I was getting 40s and 50s, whereas my little classmates were getting 70, 80, whatever, passing grades,
Right.
But I was getting failing grades. And when I brought them home, my father would punch me. And that's why I had stomach cramps, mm-hmm. because I was scared of my father hitting me. So when I said stomach cramps, I was telling the truth. But the rest of that story is I was getting stomach cramps, I thought, every morning until I realized it had to do with school days, bringing home those tests. Yep. And then one day, the light bulb again went off of my mind. I was walking to school, and I stopped and I said, wait a minute. If I could only remember the answers to the questions that Mrs. Goldfisher is asking, I will get passing grades, and my father won't hit me anymore. Yeah. Incidentally, I go off on tangents, Patrick, so forgive me. I always come back to it. That's the way my memory works. The whole point is when Johnny asked me about that, I said that I told him this story, and I said my father punched me. Again, about 10 days later or 2 weeks later, Freddie DeCordova called me again. He said, oh, God, Harry, we got 10,000 pieces of mail now negative about you. And again, to make a long story short, the negativity was, you don't say your father punched you. So now when I'm asked, I say my father punished me. That's okay. All right? I couldn't say my father punched me. So anyway, to make this long story short, I said if I could only remember the questions, because I started to realize that you couldn't intellectualize the kind of questions she was asking. I didn't know the word intellectualize then, but I thought that way, because the kind of questions that were asked were either you knew them or you don't. I've written about this. The word remember and know, K-N-O-W, and learn, they're all synonyms. If you learn something, you remember it. If you remember it, you know it. It's a full circle or cycle. And I started to realize that. How do I remember a question like, what's the capital of Maryland? Okay, I want to remember it's Annapolis. How do I do that? That's what started it. I went to the library and looked for books, if there were such a thing. I didn't realize there were at that age, on how to remember. And I was led into a room by the librarian that nobody had been in probably for years, because there were cobwebs all over the door. Mm-hmm. And in the corner were a bunch of books on memory training. Some of them dated back to, I don't know, the 17th century. I have a bunch of them in my private collection now. But most of it, 99.9% of what I read, I didn't understand. But that little bit that I did understand changed my life. I started to apply it to these kind of questions, et cetera. And again, another pivot point changed my life.
That insight right there, that memory is a synonym for knowledge. You can see this in Aristotle, it's in Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine. That's really the bedrock of everything you do, isn't it? Because it takes it out of the mystical, magical into, try to forget something that you know. That's what got me into your books, by the way, that fundamental insight.
I used to say that when I opened my appearances. I used to say, I'm always, you know what I'm amazed at? I'm amazed at the fact that people are amazed at what I do. Because the truth of the matter is, we all have great memories. You want to prove it to yourself? Try to forget something you already know. And people would laugh. Because the truth of the matter is, the more you try to forget something, the better you're going to remember it.
Yeah, that's right. Now, how did you find out that as a writer, you are unusually clear? I'm not just blowing smoke, Harry. When I read your books, doesn't matter what the topic, I feel like you're sitting down next to me. You know, you anticipate my ignorance before I ask a follow-up, and boom, you're there with the clarification. How did you learn that that's a gift that you needed to work on? Well,
you know, that a lot of people tell me that. Like I said, some people tell me, by God, you're the best. Dick Cavett, when we met originally, he said, you are the best expository writer I've ever read. I was very impressed. This was Dick Cavett, you know. I mean, wow. So, I don't know how to answer your question. I've never studied writing. I don't know grammar. As I said before, I've got 1 year of high school. I don't know a verb from an adverb. Well, that's not true. Of course I do now. But if you get any deeper than that, I don't know that. But I'll write a sentence sometimes, Patrick, and I'll stop and I'll say, that doesn't sound right, and I'll change it, and I'm right. I don't know. Thank God. I guess it's a gift I didn't know I had, and I don't know if the dyslexia helps there, because as I said before, I write as if everybody's like me. No ambiguities. I don't leave anything out. You know, it started that way with me in magic, Patrick, when I was very young and so interested in learning card magic, as we spoke about before. A lot of the things I read, to me, were very ambiguous. I remember saying to myself, well, wait a minute, does he mean the little finger or the second finger? Does he mean the deck face up or face down? In other words, it was not explained clearly. And as time went by, I once said to myself, I think I could do it better. And I did. That's when my first book came out and people started to rave about it. I didn't expect that. But I did teach things better because, again, I taught as if everybody was like me. If you're going to hold the deck face up, damn it, say so. Don't let me decide for myself.
Yeah, people don't understand how challenging it is. And if a magician is listening right now, I dare you to try to explain in writing how to do a double lift. Good luck.
Right.
It's, to paint a picture with words is not easy.
No, it isn't. And thank God, I'm knocking wood mentally as we speak. Patrick, I'm not religious, but I hedge my bets. Thank God I can do it.
Yeah. W.C. Fields was a lifelong atheist, Harry. There's a funny story. It's probably apocryphal, but on his deathbed, he was alleged to be looking through the Bible, and his family said, W.C., what are you doing? You're an atheist. Why are you reading the Bible on your deathbed? And he said, looking for loopholes, the loopholes.
Right. Like I say, I hedge my bets. I'm not going to take any chances.
Is it fun for you to go back as you redo and make collections out of your books? Is it fun to go back and realize, as good as you were, there are finesses you can now add in a newer presentation? Do you enjoy editing yourself?
But you know what's happening now, Patrick? It started with my most recent book, Jaw Droppers, and it's happening with a book that's coming out like the end of this month called Only My Apocalypse. It has to do with all my contributions to the 20 years of that magic magazine that I did. What's happening... Well, I'm a little older now, Patrick. My fingers are arthritic. I have pains. There are certain things that I can no longer do because of my arthritic fingers. Also, for the last 2 decades, I don't carry my own deck of cards. I just refuse to do that. And I've written about this, Patrick. I've written, if you use your own deck of cards, I don't care how good you are, how great the trick is, you're going to lose a minimum of 10 or 20% of the effectiveness of the trick if you use your own deck.
Yeah, because they assume it's a gimmick deck, right?
They're going to think it's a trick deck. And, when I've said this to magicians, I would say it at lectures, I wrote it in a couple of my books, they'd say, well, one guy said to me originally, and then I used it in my books because I wanted to repeat this, because I know a lot of magicians think this way. He said, well, when I'm finished, I give the person my deck. That way they know it's a regular deck. And I said, no, they don't, because I tried that once years ago. The person said, wait a minute, I'm not a magician. I can't find the trickery here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
In other words, this is the path of least resistance to a layman, or to most laymen. In other words, if you're going to do a really impossible thing with a deck of cards, they're going to say it's got to be a trick deck. That's it.
Yeah, that's right.
That's their only out. And the only way to eliminate that is to do that great impossibility with his deck or her deck.
That's right. You mentioned Apocalypse. Is that a official title? I was going to suggest a title for you I thought you'd like.
Well, no, there's a book coming out called Only My Apocalypse.
Only My Apocalypse. As you said it, I thought, wouldn't it be good to have a title, Read My Apocalypse?
Oh, yeah, right. But too late now.
Yeah, maybe too clever anyway. Maybe too clever.
Yeah, right.
Harry, I interview people for a living, and part of my ongoing education is to watch the greats of the past. Dick Cavett's one. I'd love to interview the great Dick Cavett. But another man whose every show I've watched is Jack Parr. And I loved your story that you could not get on the Jack Parr show to save your soul. How did that eventually happen?
You want to hear that story?
Yeah.
Well, what happened, again, I was very young. I was just breaking in my memory act, working with my wife. We did the act together for 20 years, all over the world. Renee and I, she passed away a couple of years ago, but we were married for 70 years. But for 20 years, we did the act. We were called Harry, Lorayne, and Renee, The Marvels of Memory. That was our title, which was wrong. I realized after I did that on my brochures, because I remember once being introduced as The Marbles of Memory. I said to Renee, I got to roll out on stage. We're marbles of memory. So, also Harry, Lorayne, and Renee was not good because everyone thought it was three people. Harry, Lorayne, and Renee. So live and learn. I changed all those things as years went on. But anyway, at the beginning, the way we used to judge things in those days in showbiz was how much money you were getting for an appearance. Yeah. In those days, they were called club dates. You were at a different venue every night doing a different show. And the reason I'm telling you that is a lot of the people who were on the Jack Parr show, which was very important in those days, were people who were getting less money than I did when we were doing a club date. So I got very annoyed. I can't get on the show. And I used to talk to a guy by the name of Bob Shanks, who he was Jack Parr's talent coordinator. He eventually became like the vice president of ABC. I believe it was ABC. Anyway, we talked so often, we were on a first-name basis, and he finally once said to me, Harry, I brought up your name again at a meeting, and Jack Parr pounded the table and he said, would you leave me alone with Harry Lorayne? He got very annoyed, so I can't bring up your name anymore. I just could not, for some reason, Jack Parr didn't like my name or what, I couldn't get on the show. So now, different venue. I broke in the Catskills. I don't know if your listeners or a few, Patrick, know the Catskill area in New York State, where there were a lot of important hotels like the Concord, Grossinger's, Brown's, Kutcher's. I'm naming a few of the top hotels there. Anyway, I used to work there. That's where I broke in the first year or two that we were doing the act. And the opening thing that I did at every appearance, and I still do, is to remember the names and faces of everybody in my audience. Yes. Okay, I was working at Grossinger's this day, and there were a couple of important people. There was an area in the back of the dining room where important visitors used to sit. And this particular day, Morse Hart was there with his wife, Kitty Carlisle. Now, Morse Hart, again, I don't know how many of your listeners will know that name, but he was very important way back then. He was the director of My Fair Lady, and he did a lot of theater, and he wrote a book called Act One, which is very important. Yeah. Anyway, he was an important guy, so I met him, we talked, etc.
And now
comes
Harry,
showtime. I met him at dinner time.
Harry, Harry, he was married to Kitty Carlisle, just to fill that in, right? Moss Hart was married.
Yeah, Kitty Carlisle, right, was his wife.
Yeah.
And so I'm ready at the theater now, and somebody comes backstage and says, Harry, Moss Hart is here with his wife in the audience. I said, well, yeah, the guy was so excited. I didn't know why he was so excited. He said he never comes to the shows, but he wanted to see you. So, okay, I was flattered. Mm-hmm. I do my thing. And later on, we were in the coffee shop after my show, and usually I would stay over at places like the Concord and Grossinger's. They was very nice, gave me the top best rooms, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. But I had a show to do the next day in New York, so I had to leave. So Renee and I were just having coffee, and then we were going to drive home late at night. Mm-hmm. And we're sitting in the coffee shop, and a waiter comes over and says, Mr. Lorayne, Mr. Hart has asked if you would come over and join him at his table, which we did, obviously. I was very flattered. He was sitting with, I can't think of their first names. Their name was Hornblower, another well-known couple.
Yeah. Arthur.
Say it again.
Arthur and Bubbles.
There you go, Bubbles. Yeah. That's it, Bubbles Hornblower. We're at the table with Moss and his wife Kitty, and Renee and I sat with them, and we talked, and we were having laughs, etc. Now we had to go. Renee and I, as I said, we had to drive home, and when we were about to leave, Moss Hart turned to me. This is, again, I call them pivot points. How do you forget these things? Yep. Moss Hart, to me, was, this important guy, turns to me and he says, listen, Harry, you have done something for me tonight that I will never forget. How can I do something for you that you won't forget? And the first thing that came to my mind, I said, get me on the Jack Parr show.
Right.
Renee kicked me under the table. I still have the black and blue mark, for God's sake. She thought I was being stupid. But that's the first thing that came to my mind. And Mr. Hart said to me, Harry, here's my home address. He gave me his card, lived on 92nd Street and Park Avenue in New York City. And he said, send me a letter saying what you would do. Describe the way you remember everybody's name in the audience. Mm-hmm. And like I say, he gave me his card, and I said, of course, I'll do that. We drove home. I remember Renee saying to me, are you really going to send him a letter explaining that, hon? And I said, what the heck? It's 5 cents. The postage then was 5 cents. I said, of course, what have I got to lose? Anyway, I did it. I'm sitting here talking to you, and I have a letter from Moss Hart framed on my wall that I'm looking at right now. Yeah. Because he eventually sent me a letter. He said, I received your letter, Harry. Give me some time. I will eventually send it to Mr. Parr. Mm-hmm. Make a long story short, I get a call from Bob Shanks. I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks later. Incidentally, let me tell you that Moss Hart was doing the Jack Parr show quite often, and from what I was told, that was the only show he did, was the Jack Parr show at that time, right. Plugging his shows on Broadway, his book, Act One, things like that. Yep. So anyway, Bob Shanks calls me, and he says, hey, Harry, what are you doing next Tuesday? So I said, I think since you called, I'm on the Jack Parr show. He said, yeah. And he said, you know what happened, don't you? I said, yeah, I think so. I think Moss Hart sent him a letter. He said to me, no, Harry, Moss Hart didn't send him a letter. He came personally, and he said to Jack Parr, he told him about you, and he said, if you don't put this guy on your show, I will never do your show again.
And that was the green light.
I just, give me a second.
Sure.
Oh, boy. I still, I get emotional.
Yeah.
Over some things, I just told this story, and
It's okay.
Oh boy! Anyway, so that's what he did. This was Moss Hart did this for this young squirt. I mean, I was 19, I don't know, 18 years old, and that's what he said to Jack Parr. And to end this story, I'm now backstage I had met everybody in the studio audience. That's 400 people, Patrick. I met them all because I was going to do the best I could, after I got this show. And we're backstage, and Jack Parr, he was a cigar smoker off camera, and he was a pacer, and he's pacing back and forth. And I'm a bit of a pacer myself, so we used to pass each other as we paced. And he stopped me at one pace, and he said, listen, Harry, listen, he called me pal. He said, listen, pal, I found out afterwards if he called you pal, he didn't like you very much.
Not a compliment.
Yeah, exactly. And he said, listen, pal, I'm going to give you only about 6 or 7 minutes, if that much. He said, so just remember a few of the people on the aisles, And I said, yes, Mr. Parr. Now comes the show, and he introduces me, and we talk for a minute. And he keeps calling me pal, and I keep calling him Mr. Parr. And finally, he says, "All right, why don't you do what you're here to do?" And I had arranged for somebody to give me a hand mic, and I say, with the few people I met, I always said few because it's my showbiz. I'm pretty good at that. I said, with the few people I met, please stand. And when the whole audience stands, that's a gasper right there, because they expect 10 or 12 people to stand up. So here, 400 people stand up, and I see, what's his name, Mr. Parr, get white under his makeup because he didn't want me to do this. He didn't think there was time. There was a big clock in the studio, and I saw that I had about 6 minutes. And I'm a fast talker as it is, as I'm sure you realize, Patrick, but I started to talk real fast, calling off these names, having people sit down as I called their names. And it was a slanted studio. I'm walking up the stairs doing it, and I'm way at the top of the stairs calling off. There are about 10 people left standing, and I hear Mr. Parr yelling, "Harry, hey, pal, listen, you remember me? I'm Jack Parr. We got to go off the air. Come on down here." And I walked down, but as I walked down, I was going to finish this. I call off the few people that are still standing as I'm walking down till all 400 people are seated. And as I come to his desk, to Jack Parr, he said, "Amazing, amazing." He said amazing 3 times. I know that because I used it in my brochures after that for a couple of years. Who made Jack Parr say amazing 3 times, And he said amazing, 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 and that was it. That was my first show. Jack Parr didn't talk to me when we went off the air. My wife said to me when we were driving home, she said, "Hon, you were terrific." My wife was very complimentary. She used to say to me, "Hon, what you do on stage is miraculous. I don't get it," etc., which was very nice. I don't know if she was just being a good wife or what, but she always said that to me. Yeah. And at that time when we were driving home, she said, "Hon, you were terrific, but they kept calling him Mr. Parr. Nobody else called him Mr. Parr. They called him Jack." Yeah. I said, "Hon, it was gut instinct. I just felt calling him Jack would not be right. So now why am I telling you this? A week passes, 10 days passes, I get another call from Bob Shanks. He says to me, "Harry, what are you doing next Thursday?" So I think I'm on the Jack Parr show again. He said, "Yeah, now a couple of things, Harry. We got a whole bunch of mail from people saying, listen, we can't believe what this guy did. Those people in the audience, they had to be personal friends of his." Yeah. He said, "Mr. Parr would like to know, how do you answer that?" The first thing that came to my mind, I said, "Who the hell's got 400 friends?" Right. So that's the first thing I said. And then he said, incidentally, Jack was very pleased that you called him Mr. Parr. And I said, I'll call him King Parr as long as he keeps putting me on the show. Yeah. And then the next night, or that same day when Jack Parr was doing his 15-minute piece in the front before he sat down at his desk, he told the story about 400 people, and he ended it as if it was his line. He said, "Who the heck has got 400 friends?"
That's great.
He stole that line from me. But anyway, I got the show again, and that's my Jack Parr. That was very important to me at that time.
Well, he was it, wasn't he? He was the predecessor, for folks who don't know who he is, the predecessor of Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show. Very urbane, very sort of intellectual, but not a snob, just a well-spoken, kind of mellifluous figure. And probably
he was he became very, very important. He was, he was a very strange Man, after I had done his show, the few times I did it, and you got to remember that when I was doing my personal act, I walk around meeting all the people, and they started to know who I was, and et cetera, et cetera. People started to say to me, "Gee, what do you think of Jack Parr?" And I was very careful, because the first thing that came to my mind, I didn't like him. He was not, as far as I'm concerned, not a very nice person. One of the images that's flitting through my mind, I remember after one of the times I did the show, we're going down the elevator together, and there are other people in the elevator, and a man says to me, "Oh, Mr. Parr, I'm such a big fan," and he sticks out his hand, and Jack Parr did not shake his hand. So things like that stayed in my mind. He was not a very nice person. He also did things, in those days, Patrick, I don't even know how to explain this, but somebody explained it to me, because I met an engineer who used to work on the Jack Parr show years later, and we talked about my appearances. In those days, they used to film, or what they called kinescope, the show on the East Coast, and then somebody would physically take a copy of the kinescope, run it to the airport, and give it to somebody waiting there who would fly it to the West Coast so they can show that same show out of California. So the reason I learned about this is when I was talking to this engineer, he was telling me about this. He said, "But you know what Jack Parr used to do? He would sit and edit the show that he did here in New York before he sent it to the airport to go to California." He said, and I know this because I was working there then, and I did it with one of your appearances, where when you were calling off all the names and the camera was following you, and the expression of the people as you called their names, the look of surprise and amazement on their faces, what Mr. Parr would do, he would inject his face into it so that they didn't see you at that moment, they saw Jack Parr.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what I was told. So that's the kind of person he was. Listen, you meet from different areas. Compare Jack Parr to Johnny Carson. Oh, my God. Johnny Carson became a personal friend.
Yeah. Television was a big game changer for you, wasn't it? Because here now consumers of media have so many choices, but in England and the United States and my upbringing in Canada, certain shows came on and everybody watched them, whether it was Bishop Sheen or, drawing a blank now, used to do the Milton Berle and so on. What was it like? What was it like to be recognized by everyone on the street? You can't get 10 feet without saying, "Hey, Harry, great! I saw you last night on the Paul Daniels or Michael Parkinson show."
Well, that you mentioned Michael Parkinson. That's where it happened much more than here. It seems there was more choices here in the States. I mean, I remember doing the Michael Parkinson show, which I did a few times. And the way, if you remember, if you saw his show, first of all, here's the difference. If you were he went on at 11:30 at night. If you were watching telly, which is what they called it in England,
that's right.
If you were watching telly at 11:30 at night, you were watching the Michael Parkinson show. You know why? There was nothing else on.
Yeah.
There were no choices like there were here in the States. So I did his show. It was an hour and a half show. He always had two guests. He gave each guest 45 minutes. Well, the first time I did his show, I remembered everybody's name. We kid around. We talked. What's his name? I used to do a thing I remember these little pieces. I used to do a thing where I remembered all the states and numbered from 1 to 50 and their capital cities and their populations at that time, which I could rattle off forwards and backwards. I did that in my act. So Michael Parkinson, once he had one of those papers that I handed out to my audience, and he said to me, "Let me give you a population backwards, Terry," and he did. And I said, "That's Maryland, the capital is Annapolis, blah, 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 Mr. Nazareth Park." And I said his name backwards, so people screamed about that, and et cetera. Anyway, the reason I'm telling you this, the next day, Patrick, I couldn't walk the streets. what you said. I mean, everybody recognized me. I couldn't sit. Renee was always with me when I traveled. We were sitting having lunch or coffee, and people were pointing to me all over the restaurant, etc. When I left the country, the customs guy, he said, "Now you remembered to list everything you purchased, didn't you?" But, everybody knew who I was. Mm-hmm. Which was much different than here in the States. Same thing happened. I did a show, an important talk show out of Dublin, Ireland. Same thing. I couldn't walk the streets the next day.
It must have been moving for you to have those kind of mountaintop moments of satisfaction and kind of going back in your mind to all the things you overcame to becoming someone so well, not just popular, but respected. That must have been.
Well, when I look back at it, I'm always amazed. Like I said to you before, I'm an original these dems and those kid from the Lower East Side with no education. So to have written I think 50 books and to be recognized all over the world is kind of talk about magic, huh, Patrick?
Yeah, right. Here's one story I love, and this goes to not just helping students, not just helping me, not just helping actors memorize lines, but tell us about the Air Force colonel who was shot down over Vietnam. This is a powerful story.
Yeah, it was one of the highlights of my life, really, at that point. And I got this letter, and I still keep it. I have it on file somewhere, the original letter. He was shot down over Vietnam, and he said in the letter that he had just read one of my books on memory, and when he was shot down, he was wounded. He had to lie on his back for a month or something like that. And, it's the old story with prisoners. They take away your belt and your shoelaces so you don't kill yourself, etc. And they take away all reading material, so you're just laying there like a mummy dummy, kind of thing. Yeah. He said that what kept me going, he said, was going over all your teachings about memory training, going over them in my mind. And here's the interesting part of the letter. He said, when I started to be able to move because of my wound and I was getting a little better, I started to tap with Morse code on the walls, and other American prisoners would answer back via Morse code, and I started to teach him your systems, Harry. And that started for months. We went on teaching each other your systems, and we started to apply it, and he started to rattle off these things. We applied it to music, to philosophy, he started to list all these things, and he ended up, he said that how you changed my life, etc., and he ended the thing by saying, "You are my hero." Mm-hmm. And you know what happened? I don't know if you know this. Then I was doing, it was either the Carson Show or one other, either Merv Griffin or I can't think, Mike Douglas, one of those shows. They did what do you call it in television when they filmed him. He lived in South Carolina, mm-hmm. and they filmed him, and you were able to see it on a big screen in the studio.
Yeah, like
a
remote.
I'm sorry?
A remote.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, I'm very bad with those. Mm-hmm. With I'm still working on the crystal radio, Patrick. I don't understand. I don't understand computers and all these things. I really don't. So anyway, they had him on film, so the whole audience and all over the world, I guess, or all over the States anyway, could see him. And he told the story, and I was sitting there, and he said, he ended it by saying, "You are my hero." I started to cry. I'm a crier, Patrick. Yeah. I started to cry, and I said, "No, you are my hero." Yeah. And there was a show called That's the Truth, I think, something like that on television. And the format was there were 3 panel members, important people, and then somebody would come up and tell the story, and they didn't know if it was the truth or not. And they brought him in from South Carolina and me from New York. It was filmed in New York. Mm-hmm. And there were 3 people told the story. They were supposed to figure out who was telling the truth. So he became kind of important in my life. And one of my books that I guess is probably one of my best-known books is the memory book. And I used a piece of his letter, at least the publisher did, on the back dust jacket of that book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the one I often recommend to people. But my favorite book that you wrote, I think it's your first book, Harry. You can correct me if I'm wrong. How to Develop a Superpower Memory, 1957.
That's my first one, 1956.
56, yeah. That's...
Yeah, my God, I always say I must have been 7 years old.
Right.
And, it's interesting. It's 1956. Since then, I've had so many rip-offs, you have no idea.
Oh, yeah.
None of them were around before 1956.
Yeah. The Yoda of memory training, that was Time magazine, right?
Time magazine, yeah.
It made me wonder if there's a theoretical limit. Like, could you do 700 people? The name thing?
When I started, Patrick, I used to do 1,000.
1,000.
In other words, I'm only limited by time. But again, I've said this a few times, live and learn. I've been doing that all my life. I've been learning all my life. I have a certain kind of ego, which I understand. I've written an article about ego. You know what it was titled? It was titled Egotistical Bastard, because the first line was, why is it that most often, 90% of the time, when you hear the word egotistical, the next word is bastard?
Yeah, that's right.
Because people put down egos. And I wrote that's silly. It's misplaced ego that's bad. Of course, you got to have an ego to accomplish anything. How dare you think that somebody wants to read what you write? How dare you think that, have that kind of ego that you can write a book? Well, if there was no ego, nothing would be accomplished.
Yeah, that's right.
So obviously, ego is important. Like I say, it's misplaced ego. That's incorrect. And I wrote that article. I'm kind of quoting myself. So, it's I have a certain ego, even though I'm my terrible background, and I guess that helped me be what I became, I guess.
Well, one of the things I'm entertained by is how you crush your enemies on Magic Cafe who want to take a swing at you. It's always... Maybe it's a sinful pleasure I get. I can't wait for Harry's comeback to this latest Yahoo who wants to complain.
I've been banned. I was banned for 2 weeks or something like that, and that was months ago, and I've never gone back, and I never will. I found that. It must be ego again. How dare you tell me what I can't say and ban me? Are you kidding me? Yeah. So there's that damn ego of mine again, Patrick. I just won't go back there. I don't like, because they banned me. There was I'll tell you that story if you're interested, why I got so angry at somebody. There was a guy named Tony, the Avatar, who knows, Tony something, with a number 209. What happened, I saw an ad that Penguin Magic had kept running way back then, and it was for one of my books. It was for mathematical wizardry. You had mentioned my ability with numbers, etc. When I was in my teens, I used to do what was called in those days a lightning calculation act, doing all great things with numbers. And on the cover of my book, Mathematical Wizardry, it says, this will show you how to make people think you're a genius when you're not, you know. So, and it's true, you can make people say, oh my God, this guy's a genius. So anyway, they were running an ad for this book with like 2-sentence quotes about how great it was. And then at the end, there's a long letter from somebody knocking the hell out of the book. So I said, at the Magic Cafe, I told the story, and I said, you know what, maybe my mind is going, but is this stupid? Am I nuts? How do you run an ad trying to sell something and put down letter for the item you're trying to sell? That to me makes no sense. So I said that just to get it off my mind, because to me it is a stupid thing for Penguin to do, or for anybody to do. You want to sell something, you say great things about it. I mean, come on. Anyway, I told the story on the Magic Cafe, and this idiot Tony something or other says, listen, not everybody is going to like what you write, Mr. Lorayne. And I answered back. I said, no, you're missing the point. Of course, everybody's entitled to their opinion. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is stupid here is not the person that wrote this put-down letter about the book. What I'm saying is stupid is that Penguin used it in an ad trying to sell the book.
Yeah.
Well, this guy answers back saying the same thing. Well, this guy just didn't like your writing, Mr. Lorayne. And I said again, no, you're missing the point
still
again.
Missing the point.
And I finally, I said, and I wrote it, I was trying not to say bad words, and I said, now listen carefully. Let me see if I can get through that thick skull. I have nothing against the person that wrote that letter. What I'm calling stupid is that Penguin used it, blah, blah, blah. That's why I was banned.
Well, to me, it's like banning Frank Sinatra from a music forum. Their loss, Harry. Their loss.
Of course, I'm not going to go back. Incidentally, because of that, there's a guy out in Oregon somewhere by the name of Rudy Tinoco who started a whole new, it's called the Magician's Forum, themagiciansforum.com, if anybody's interested. Yep. He started the whole thing because of me being banned, like I'm the person that started it. So, and I'm back and forth there, so are a lot of people, and a lot of people think it's a pretty good magic forum. So, a good thing happened because of it.
The Magician's Forum. So this sounds like when life gives you lemons, you make mango juice.
Exactly. It's one of my things. I've written this a few times. There's a lot of bad, at least for me, a lot of bad becomes good. And a good example is my dyslexia. So a lot of bad does become good. That ended up a good thing for me.
That's right. It makes you wonder if FDR would have become president without polio.
There you go. Of course. Yeah. Of course. So,
I got a problem, Harry, because I could talk to you for at least 9 more hours. But I saw a photo the other day of Mel Brooks on stage somewhere addressing an audience. He looked totally alive and happy and like you, very healthy. At 90 as well. You're 90, right, Harry?
I passed my 90th birthday in May. Mel passed his in June. I'm about 6 weeks older than Mel.
I hope you rub his face in it.
Well, I always tell him, you got to call me sir. Come on, I'm older than you are. We were very good friends. We still are. It's a coast-to-coast friendship, unfortunately, at the moment. But he and Anne Bancroft and myself and Renee traveled together to Europe for 40 years, Patrick. Mm-hmm. And we'd see each other in New York because they had an apartment in New York, and he had some condos on Fisher Island in Florida. Then he always kept one condo for Renee and I, and we spent a couple of weeks there in either January or February. So we would see each other very often, and they are the ones that talked me into writing before I forget, because during all this time together, I used to tell them these stories, and they always said, half facetiously, Harry, you got to write these things down before you forget. So that became the title,
Perfect.
Before I forget. And they're the ones that talked me into it, and there are quite a bit of some stories about Mel Brooks and Anne Bancroft in the book, and pictures of them and me and Renee and et cetera. So, they talked me into it.
A lot of people don't make it to 70, Harry, let alone being married to a beautiful woman for 70 years. That's a real accomplishment.
Could you believe that? 70 years. We went together for 3. We were married specifically, really legally, for 66 and a half years. Mm-hmm. And people used to ask Renee, what the heck did you see in this guy? He's short, not particularly good looking, had no money, no education. What the heck did you see in this guy? And she used to say his energy. So thank God for small favors. Energy I had.
I can still hear it, Harry. I'm going to put a link up at patrickhoffman.media for, before I forget, a couple of your magic books. I get a lot of compliments on my memory ability, and I never thank people without mentioning you and the memory book and the superpower book. So, you're an original, Harry Lorayne, a real gift. And here's a Latin phrase for you, ad multos años, which means many more years.
Well, thank you so much.
All right, Harry Lorayne, God bless you. Keep you, and hope to touch base again.
Good enough. My pleasure, sir. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. This is The Patrick Hoffman Show.